Welcome, everyone. Um, this is Greg Copley speaking from ACF. Thank you for joining. We're going to get started now. It's 10 a.m., the time that we said we'd start the webinar, so thank you for being on time. In terms of kickstarting the webinar, I'm just going to kickstart by, first of all, obviously welcoming everyone and our guests and our speakers as well. So we've got a good lineup of speakers for you today. Uh, let's quickly start by looking at the agenda. Then I'll do some introductions to our panel of speakers. In addition to that, I'll briefly tell you a bit about who we are as ACF as well. And then from there, we're going to move on to the first sort of, I guess, chapter of our talk today. That's going to be really about what we see as our future vision of retail and where we see retail going, both online and in the high street, and of course all the different channels that retail is now operating on. Then we're going to progress on to looking at really what are the opportunities, so identifying the opportunities there, and really look at all the different technologies that are out there right now. As we know, there are a lot of technologies and therefore a lot of opportunities, so we're going to cover that and hear some thoughts on that. And then third and finally, we're then going to give some ideas and some insights into how we would approach starting when it comes to all the emerging technology in retail. So, and then we will actually finally get to a Q&A. So before I introduce our speakers, let me just quickly set the scene about who we are as ACF Technologies. So ACF Technologies is a 14 or 15-year, actually now 15-year-old company. And we specialize in the design, delivery, implementation of customer experience enhancing solutions. And like I said, we've been doing it for some time now, and we have the blessing and the opportunity to work with some of the world's largest organizations across all major sectors. So from retail, obviously retail banking in particular as well, but all the way across different local government, central government, healthcare sectors as well. So we really have a broad base of experience, and it's the basis of that experience that we would like to ultimately share some ideas with you today on. Is that we see a lot of change in retail. We also, like to say, from the agendas, we see a lot of opportunity. So today's talk really is to bring two things to the table. Number one is value. We really hope that today you're going to hear some new ideas, hopefully some ideas, like I say, that you haven't heard before from organizations such as ours. And number two, and primarily, I think really the idea is that these ideas are going to be something that you could practically actually try to implement within your organization. So not only is it going to be some ideas and some value, but these are actually going to be practical tips about where you can actually start. So without further ado, I'd like to now jump to our panel. So first, on the left-hand side, you can see myself, Greg Copley, here as the host today. I've got 2 years experience in terms of the sort of design and implementation of customer experience solutions and the marketing of these solutions, especially within the retail sector. And then working from left to right, our first speaker you're going to hear from is Simon Ronald, who really has an expertise in having the strategic visionary conversations within the retail sector. Then we're going to hear from Lawrence, and Lawrence has an amazing ability and a hell of a lot of experience when it comes to technology and innovation. And then third and finally, we're going to hear from Andy, whose experience when it comes to the actual where to start and the delivery of this technology is quite profound. So there are speakers for today. I think what we'll do is we'll start with our first speaker, who's Simon. And Simon, if you're on the line and you can hear me, hopefully you can, I'd like to ask maybe the first question, which is, from your perspective, as someone who has strategic conversations on a weekly basis, at least, with senior decision makers at organizations in the retail world, how do you see retail and the high street evolving with all this emerging technology?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I can hear you perfectly well coming through. Yeah, I think that's a perfect start actually there, Greg, as you've said, the idea that we focus on customer experience. I think that is going to be the core to everything that we talk about today. And I think there's a few facts that we need to kind of consider from the outset, which is the high street has changed, over the past 20, 30 years quite radically, and that will continue to do so. I think this conversation that we're going to have is really the key to that. I think emerging tech, actually the right emerging tech, will be the catalyst for the high street to change much quicker. The customer experience has got to be influenced by the emerging tech. Your customers are adopting new technology a lot faster than you are, and they're becoming more demanding. And I think the actual technology that you deploy is going to benefit customers in many different ways, such as offering some customers the ability to access products and services a lot faster. There's a large percentage of the population now that just want instant service. We want it now. But there's other things, there's other products, there's other services that need to slow down slightly, I think, and become a true experience, an engaging experience. And I think that's where the right emerging tech is going to benefit the high street moving forward. When we started this, funny enough, we were originally just focusing on certain parts of retail. I think we started out looking at telcos and banks, actually. But in the few weeks before, whilst we've been investigating kind of the technologies, we've been talking to a number of industries, local government, central government, and the story is the same across the board. There's a few kind of common themes that keep coming up in whatever industry you come from. One of them is that move from physical to digital. That's not new. That's been going on for many years now. And it can clearly be seen really from the demand of the customers. It kind of, if it's done properly, that move from physical to digital, if it's done properly, then it's naturally going to benefit both the organization to improve processes and also the customer. The customer is going to be able to gain access to you and your services and your products on whatever channel they choose. I think the focus has always been in this move from physical to digital, focusing on products and services, but there's still a lot missing in the background, I see, across all organizations. It's not just a sales orientated move from physical to digital. I think it should also be service orientated. Such as complaint handling be an example. Actually, I've seen recently that I think this year and maybe next year there's the first annual complaints handling awards being given out, which I think is quite interesting because that is something that's overlooked from an emerging tech perspective. If as a customer, we know things go wrong, but what does the organization do when things go wrong? How can they utilize emerging tech to actually fix my problem a lot quicker than they are? So all of this is kind of focusing again on emerging tech, but the customer experience. And it's, I think, going to blur the lines between that physical and digital. At the moment, I see a lot of organizations doing the actual move from physical to digital as two separate platforms. But I still don't see any blurs between the line at the moment. The idea that still there's no organization out there that will allow me to begin something online, then finish it in store, such as an application form, such as filling out my details to a point where I'm stuck and I can't hit save anywhere, walk into a store and the store pick up where I left off. So I think the future of emerging tech needs to blur the lines between that physical and digital. And I just see just a few variations between industries out there. And I think they're quite small, really. I think in banking, this move from physical to digital has been happening for many years. I'm kind of surprised how slow it's happening, to be honest. I know that my mobile application now is rich with features that allows me to do probably 80% of the services, but I'm surprised I can't do 100% of what I need on my mobile phone. I think the difference in the financial sector is that they're going to be able to implement a blur in store. I think the physical presence will remain, and the ability to blur the lines between self-serve and actual physical service will change. I think we've seen a lot of companies call it kind of assisted service. If you arrive and you use an ATM, then there's a member of staff who you can call for help, and they can start to override those features on that ATM to help you maybe take out more than your daily limit to, blur those lines as well. I think is quite an interesting thing in store. But generally in retail, I think we're seeing that move from physical to digital a lot quicker. I think maybe because in retail environments there's a much richer availability of products and services. So I think that move from digital to physical is happening quicker. Again, I think there's the same of the idea of there needs to be a focus on service in this kind of emerging tech arena. Um, and I think what emerging tech is going to do in that retail environment is allow organizations to move away from products in store more to more service driven services. So, such as personalized shoppers, the idea that you can go to a store. I think in 2019, we've been reading recently quite a lot in the news about Nike in the US. I think they're going to start opening more service orientated stores, offering the expertise for their products on how to use such as trainers for your running. And I think that is going to be quite a strong focus moving forward, really across all organisations. I see that drive, because I think there is a clear thing that we see with customers. They're still to this day willing to pay more for a better service, and I think that's one thing here that we need to consider with emerging technology is it going to give the customer a better experience, better service, and are you going to retain your customers ultimately? Um, and the last two things, I think, really, before we start to dig in to some of this technology, I think for me, there's two things you need to consider. We know all organisations at the moment are investing in technology and looking at this emerging tech. But I think in 2018 now, organisations really should have a platform that can allow you to adopt new technology at a low cost. I think the days of expensive and long customization and development to introduce new technology should have gone by now. I think organizations really should be looking at platforms that allow them to adopt new technologies very rapidly and test them, because not all of them will work. And the one thing we do know here is, the high street's going to change. The way you give your service is going to change. You really need to have the ability to adopt new technology, which is going to change, and it's going to change quicker. And I think it's going to have a huge influence on the high street and the way that services and products are offered to customers. And then, Greg, I think a good last thing from me, really, before we hand over and dig into some of this stuff. I see a lot of new technology out there. I see lots of new stuff being released that's primarily got quite a short shelf life. I think you see a lot of technology that offers very little business benefit, very little customer experience benefit. I think the idea here is that you really need to be considering the solutions that you do deploy, because what I don't think you should be doing as an organization is really choosing technology that only offers you a wow factor.
Lovely. Thanks, Simon. I think that's a really nice transition point, actually, to now hear from our next speaker, which is Lawrence. So, Lawrence, if I could ask you a couple of questions, because I've got a lot of questions around, a lot of the technology in retail. But perhaps maybe my first question would be just, for the audience, what are some of these technologies that you're seeing in terms of the conversations you're having with retail organizations? What are the sort of prevalent technologies that you see?
Sure, thanks, Greg. So, yes, recent years we've seen many redevelopments in retail chains and business, and there's been a wide variety of new technologies that we've seen focused upon and deployed. If I just go through some of the very common ones, we see things such as geolocation, geofencing, facial recognition and biometrics. Artificial intelligence is one of the new cutting edge ones. VR, AR, touch screens and digital display being put everywhere, chatbots, assistive technologies, personal device integration such as fitness trackers and life cameras, and then more recent ones such as actual physical bots and drones. Now, we've seen many retail chains attempt to land these technologies, various technologies, many successfully, but equally many have failed to put these in. And it is important to understand how best to utilize those new technologies. And I think there's value in examining a few of them and the motivations, drivers, and the success or failure criteria behind them, especially what Simon was mentioning as well.
Brilliant. So there's clearly a long list of technologies. For the sake of today's conversation in the world of retail, I definitely think that we're seeing maybe a handful of technologies being more widely adopted. For example, chatbots. Chatbots is a conversation I'm having with a lot of clients at the moment, and obviously the use of AI behind those chatbot technologies. So maybe, do you think you could maybe deep dive into a couple of technologies that you see are, like I say, more popular at the moment, and maybe share some thoughts about maybe why people are succeeding and perhaps not with those technologies?
Of course. As you mentioned, chatbots, commonly also known as assistive technologies. These have been in development for many years, and they're now pretty mainstream, mostly mature. Many retail organizations are introducing assistants both online, on the telephone, but also more recently as a skill within home assistant devices such as Amazon Echoes, Google Homes, and so on. So often these are introduced as a new channel to help customers with questions and as a way to lessen the load upon retail agents, staff, and existing processes. But it is important to understand the current capabilities of these automated channels to know how best to deploy them. Currently, assistive technologies are good at interpreting what I would call structured questions with fairly predetermined answers to those questions. It's important to realize that they're not quite really a true artificial intelligence system like you see in the movies and so on, right? And they can't necessarily answer all inquiries sent their way. For example, if we asked something in like finance area, please tell me my current balance, or a variation such as, what is my balance? We'd probably trigger the correct answer based upon the word balance. But we could fail if someone asks, how much money is in my account? Or do I have enough money to buy that new watch or holiday or car or something like that? Unless it's been specifically trained by the organization deploying it to catch those matching keyword structures. And a customer can become quickly frustrated with hearing the typical, sorry, I don't understand that. Could you repeat it? And resort back to just trying to contact an agent as they used to previously, with a decline in the customer experience. Even with the rapid pace of progress, natural language interpretation is still quite a way to go. And me personally, the way I see this is, and the way we see this as consultants, is that human interaction is still the best channel for providing detailed knowledge, experience, anecdotes, and most importantly, that relationship between the business and the customer. What can we learn from this then? First of all, assistive channels shouldn't be used to totally replace all human interaction. We have seen this sometimes, that it becomes very difficult to just get hold of an agent. And a customer can end up going in a cycle of frustrating loops with technology when it's not solving their inquiry. So you have to make sure that there is a way for a customer to drop out and contact a real agent if need be. It doesn't have to be face to face. It can be over a web chat or over a call or something like that. And then make sure that the assistant is landed in a channel where the customer will naturally be asking structured questions, and make sure that that assistant is reviewed and periodically retrained to understand more variations in the way humans ask those questions. The way people ask a question in one region can vary from the way they ask a question in another region, and you could find a subset of your customers just don't get the responses from those assistive technologies as you expect.
Brilliant. So another technology that I know that we're often talking with customers about now is the use of geolocation. So pinpointing where customers are. Could you maybe share some thoughts on that technology?
Of course. Typically, we've seen geolocation used online and in-app to find a nearby branch. It's pretty seamless. You've got the business's app, and the customer doesn't really notice that this technology is actually being used. This functionality is then often extended to things like route mapping and route finding, wayfinding. Modern technology, however, even allows for route mapping within buildings, such as within a shopping center or a hospital, if we're talking healthcare, or even within a department itself to find a particular service area or even a particular product. However, this technology can now generally operate seamlessly in the background on a user's device in real time when a user is in a particular proximity to a zone or a branch. So now we can automate tasks such as checking in a customer for an appointment when they're near a branch, with an automated acknowledgement on the app or via an SMS to say, "Welcome to the branch for your appointment. You don't need to do anything further. We know you're here." In addition to that, if we know a customer is near a branch, now might be the time that we can send them some sort of promotional message, 10% discount, 2 for 1, or other offers that are, and here's the keyword, relevant to that customer. What do we need to be aware of? So we need to be aware that any geolocation-based offers need to follow basic principles of good customer experience. The information needs to be relevant to the customer, timely, and allow for opt-out and opt-in. It's not really any good bombarding a customer with this new fancy technology when the messages are irrelevant because your customers are just going to opt out. It's spam, essentially. But if it's a real qualified opportunity, and this is what we like to think we can help with, you're likely to garner better success.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've looked there at some of the more widely used popular technologies, geolocation and chatbots. Can we maybe now deep dive into some really fun and sort of innovative areas, and perhaps look at some of those technologies that are not so widely being adopted, but are definitely ones that are hot topics at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. Let me start with something, let's say facial recognition, and we can go beyond that, biometrics, essentially. For a while, technologies such as facial recognition has been a fairly immature solution. It hasn't really had a real problem to solve. Being able to recognize a person, you can't just deploy it ubiquitously due to privacy issues. So you can't just track everywhere a customer goes, as some businesses would love to be able to do that. A customer generally has to accept the process of facial recognition biometrics, and for a while it's been fairly difficult to know how to streamline that into a user journey. There's more obvious scenarios that people immediately think of. Identify a customer by their face or fingerprint to automatically approve a stage in process, such as check-in, payment, or just loading their customer record. There's also a tie-in here with vocal assistant technology that I've seen, where you can automatically identify a customer via their voice when on a telephone call or a web chat. However, you must consider the issue of privacy and accuracy. People are reluctant to have their biometric details stored on file, and there are genuine concerns around data theft, misidentification, hacking, all of that sort of stuff. One thing a business must consider is this technology actually providing a benefit to that particular usage? Often it's just as quick to use your bank card and do contactless or enter your PIN as it would be to scan your fingerprint or do facial recognition. You're not actually getting a benefit for this fancy new technology. But we have identified some scenarios where it can be used a little less formally or more effectively, such as providing a selfie during some stage in the process, so an agent has your face and can come and find you and identify you by name. It provides a nice personalized experience and can be a little bit more fun and personality into a flow. But there is one area where biometrics have really taken off, and that's authentication on their own personal devices, customers that is. Everybody unlocks their phone using either a fingerprint or, often still a PIN, but a lot of people unlock it with a fingerprint or with their face or their laptop as well. And because it's your personal device, it seems to ease concern around privacy. So how can a business leverage this? What they can do is consider integrating the user's phone in with the app, in with their business process. So if you want a customer to sign a digital document or approve a process step, why not send an authentication request to the customer's phone? And the customer authenticates with their fingerprint, The phone sends the approval back to the business system. So there's one other technology which we've seen that is cutting edge, and is worth talking about, and can provide some of the pitfalls of these technologies. So we talk about virtual reality, augmented reality, and just robots and drones and stuff. We've seen many organizations try to put these new technologies into stores, and they can be an experiment in being novel and generating buzz. But we do see in everyday life how quickly people normalize technology. Just remember, it's only only just over 10 years ago that the original iPhone came out, and now everybody takes that technology for granted. Smartphones are everywhere, and nobody really thinks about them. And the same can happen with a fancy new technology. You deploy VR in store, it might be tried once by a customer and never tried again because the novelty is worn off. People generally rely on content and a variety of experience to attract them. And content is generally created by humans. So you need to have some human aspect behind these technologies to keep driving content and keep the technology novel. So we've seen a couple of interesting scenarios where these have been landed. A car retailer landed a virtual driving simulator to test drive their cars. It's got the human element because it's the driver who is making the experience, and people come back and test drive cars. It costs the business very little compared to actually taking cars out. A holiday retailer can provide a VR experience to explore faraway destinations. This might be a good usage for that single-use technology, because people generally only take holidays a few times a year. Therefore, you're not expecting customers to come back on a daily or weekly basis to try this technology out. So what do we need to know? A retailer should be careful for introducing technology for technology's sake. And as long as the expectation of the retailer and the customer are in line with each other and the technology, you should be able to deploy this more successfully. But at the heart of all these changes, businesses should be striving to provide the core, which is exemplary customer experience, which is based upon two factors: a good customer relationship and good organizational processes. And any technology that you look to introduce should be based upon that core strong backbone.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lawrence. That's a really great perspective. Hopefully you guys got some new ideas. I certainly did from Lawrence's thoughts there. Now I think it makes sense to progress the conversation over to Andy, our next speaker. And I think let's change the conversation from looking at all the technology and all these opportunities out there to really getting practical with where to start, how to start, and really how to actually progress these concepts and ideas from being something that's just in the ether to actually being a part of your organization and ultimately part of your customer experience. So our next speaker is Andy. So Andy, if I can start with our first question, which really is, in your experience in delivering these technologies to organizations, where do you think is a good place to start? And maybe could you share some tips and tricks on sort of different strategies and approaches to making this technology real in the organizations out there in retail?
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so yeah, thanks to Lawrence as well. So I guess after following on from what Lawrence has just talked about with what all these cool technologies are, I'll get the fun task of talking about what makes that a reality, I guess. So like, how do we actually go about deciding what technologies to deliver, why we're delivering them, and also, yeah, how we're actually going to deliver them as well. So this was going to talk a little bit to start with about how we come up with choosing a technology and what are the factors behind choosing which of these emerging technologies we want to embrace. So when we start thinking about this, we obviously this leads us to kind of a risk versus reward discussion, really. So and that comes down to what are we trying to achieve in terms of the benefits for our staff, the benefits for our customers. And this really is if we look at it from purely a financial perspective, we're talking about the return on investment. So what are we going to get in terms of bang for our buck when we invest in a new technology and we roll it out, and we want to actually deliver on a business case and deliver on a goal and try and really get some return on investment. So if we look at that, then there's a number of different factors that come into play when we look at this. And that's, firstly, we might be investing in one of these emerging technologies to create a channel shift. So we might want to be driving our customers, let's say, away from using one particular channel, such as calling up a call center, to driving them online and making better use of our online technologies, such as chatbots for helping with self-service. That might be one way that we start to look at return on investment. Secondly, to touch on something that Simon mentioned at the start, which is this physical to digital shift that we see, and really not necessarily changing what we do with our physical stores on the high street from a retail perspective, but potentially making better use and different use of them. And that's something that we've seen quite a lot recently, is that when we meet with some of our clients now, it's not just a case of talking about just putting in new technologies. It's making the most out of our physical stores and potentially changing the way that we use them, so that we make the most out of our most expensive assets, which, to be honest, they are obviously the real estate and our staff. And how do we get the most value out of using those? And emerging technology can help with that, whether that be changing the way that the customer uses the store, or changing the way that the staff use the technology in the store. That's another way that we can look to decide which of the technologies we adopt and what our return on investment is going to be. And then the final couple of factors really are ones that are probably harder to put a number against, I would say. So when we look at, we're talking about channel shifts and we're talking about changing uses of physical stores, we can put some numbers against that in terms of what savings and the return on investments we can get. But when we look at just improving a customer experience, then we're obviously at that point, we're trying to improve our brand, we're trying to improve how the customer views us, we're trying to improve that customer journey when they come into the store, and they're hard to put numbers against. But they are obviously really important things to consider when we're deciding which technology to go with. And then finally, there's something that we mentioned at the start, which is really the wow factor of using an emerging technology. And that's really a fun one, because we see now, such as Nike that Simon mentioned at the start, we see some really big brands that are using technologies in some really cool and different ways. And actually, they might not be getting a return on investment for those, but they are getting their brand out there, and they're getting their name out there for leading the way in terms of their use of new technologies, which is ultimately what it's all about, getting your name out there as a brand. So moving on from just talking about purely the ROI of choosing a technology, what we've also seen recently is we've been helping companies with deciding which one to go with, and we see a mistake often where you probably cast your net a bit too wide potentially, and you look at too many different emerging technologies and you try and work out which one of them is going to be the best, and you forget to go back to what problems are you actually trying to solve and what user stories are you really trying to focus on. So really, I guess our advice there is that we should really look to hone in on just a couple of user stories and a couple of real world problems that you're facing, and then work them into your business case and your decision behind what emerging technology you're going to be using. So that doesn't have to be a really complex use case. You might want to try and achieve something simple to start with. And off the back of that, quite often when we're talking about making the most out of emerging technologies, we think of linking them to our existing systems. And this comes down to, when you choose that technology, do we need to integrate it with an existing legacy system that we have? And that really poses quite a big problem in terms of the risk versus reward and the ROI of your implementation, let's say, because you're then into a realm where, do we need to address some of our technical debt as an organization? So when we're looking at technologies that Lawrence mentioned, like chatbots and facial recognition and making the most of the customer experience, and in particular personalizing that customer experience, it can be really hard to personalize the customer experience without integrating to, let's say, a legacy CRM. But what we've done, certainly in some of the implementations where we've rolled with, and if I take one of our clients previously as an example, we did this with Boots several years ago, where we actually, instead of, let's say, integrating with a CRM, like we can just act as the CRM ourselves, as a kind of holistic delivery. And what that then enables you to do is get yourself out there, get yourself to market with a new technology for both your staff and your customers, and work out whether you're really getting a benefit from that. And that really helps you, decide whether it's going to work or whether you can roll it out further. And when we think about that, that moves me on to my next point, which is taking us away from what we deliver and why we deliver it, but more of the how we deliver it. And so if we look at that, when what we've seen in the last few years in particular, and obviously agile delivery and iterative delivery has been around for a while, but what we've really seen in the last few years is really companies and industries start to really pick up on that and utilize that platform to delivery from an agile and iterative approach to really get the technology out there faster. And it's interesting that actually you'd often associate the use of agile and iterative technologies more with, let's say, retail clients, but actually what we've seen is that that's not really the case. It's now an industry agnostic delivery. So we work with a lot with both central government clients as well as retail and banking clients, and we see across the board that actually all of these companies are now starting to adopt this rapid iterative way of changing. And that comes back to another thing that Simon was mentioning, which was about setting us up with a platform for success, really, to deliver some of those new technologies. And with that, when we start to look at how we deliver, then we see that one of the key things and key advantages really in delivering those changes fast, it allows us to get feedback from both our customers and our staff quickly. So we can then come up with an idea, we can implement that idea, and we can immediately get feedback on that idea. And if we need to tweak it, then we can tweak it. And really, iterative, agile, rapid delivery allows you to do that. And certainly that's what we focused on really in terms of delivery for a lot of our clients. We see now that we start to use the proof of concepts and pilot rollouts much more than just let's sit in a room, whiteboard some ideas and roll it out to our entire estate without really thinking about, is this actually working for our customers? Is this actually working for our staff? And that's one thing that is often overlooked actually is that employee and customer feedback. So it's really, and there's a number of different ways you can do that, and new technology can help us get that feedback quicker and allow us to act on it. So when we look at some of the there's some really simple ones of web forms and SMS feedback and ways of capturing feedback from staff and customers that we can quickly utilize. And as soon as we've rolled out, we can then rapidly tell, let's say within a week, is this working? Have we seen some improvements? Is our AI and our BI tools telling us that actually we have made a tangible improvement to some of our in-store processes? And if we get that feedback and if it hasn't worked, then we can just use our platform of rapid and iterative delivery to go and deliver a change straight away to those stores that we've rolled out. It doesn't have to be to the entire estate, but we've obviously just rolled out to a proof of concept or a pilot set of stores, and we're immediately going to implement that change and see whether it then has a positive effect. And really that whole setting yourself up for an iterative and rapid delivery just makes it easier to adopt change, because that's one of the major blockers really for when we look at both staff and customers is that kind of acceptance and adoption of change. So I guess that then just leads me on to the last point really, just to summarize that what we've talked about here is we've talked about a lot of technology, a lot of new technology, and a lot of customer change in both expectations and behavior and how we deliver on that. And it's pretty clear that when reviewing all of these changes, we need to, as a business, you need to take quite a careful and considered approach to choosing which of these emerging technologies to go with. But the fact is that there are new and emerging technologies out there, and they can help to drive business improvement, generate a return on investment. And you are going to find that some of those ideas will work, some of them won't, some of them will remain niche. But if we set ourselves up for success in terms of how we deliver them, then you are able to maximize the benefit of utilizing all these different technologies. Fantastic.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. So again, I think a really nice transition from looking at the strategic trends that are happening all the way through to looking at individual technologies. Why are some working? Why are some not? What are more prevalent technologies, and what are the sort of new, more on the outer edges of what's possible at the moment? And then finishing off there with Andy's perspective on where to start and how to actually work out what is going to be your return on investment for any investment you do make. So I think hopefully that's painted quite a good picture to our audience today. And I wanted to just quickly summarize before we jump into the Q&A, really with the top, what we see as hopefully the top 5 takeaways from the talk. I won't go through them one at a time, but I'll just share really on top of this, really my thoughts about what I see as the just a handful of the key things that we've heard today. And I think the first thing for me is there's clearly a lot of change in the world of retail. And when I say retail, I mean online, offline, just general behavior of customers. There's a lot of change, but it also means that there's a lot of opportunity. And I think really the opportunity, to identify the opportunity, it comes down to monitoring and being, having your finger on the pulse when it comes to those trends itself. So that's the first sort of thing. The second thing to me is it comes down to it's the question of what technology to select and why, and the need to make that a value driven piece of technology. And I think the thing to remember, what I've heard from Lawrence today, is that ultimately anything we do here it tends to be for the single purpose of enhancing the customer experience. And as long as your customer is at the heart of any decision that you make, you're probably going to be selecting the right technology, and then supporting that data will help you verify what you believe to be true or not. So I think that's the second thing. And then thirdly, from myself, the final thing is when starting, it really is about working smart and not just working hard. So it's spending some time thinking about, where am I going to get return on investment? Where am I going to create the most maximum impact for my customer experience? And really just having that ROI conversation at the front of mind, alongside the impact that this could have for the customer. So that's sort of my perspective on it. There's 5 takeaways that we sort of put on the screen for us. But I think it'll be great now to move into the questions and answers. So if anyone wants to, or they have already submitted questions in the chat section, then I think it'll be good to do that. So I think the main thing before I start getting into the questions is that, like I say, we love to have questions. So please ask away. On the right hand side, there should be a chat function, so feel free to ask away. I can see there's a couple of questions that I have here that I think are actually, well, this first one seems very appropriate, and that's actually to Simon. So Simon, if you're still on the line, can I maybe ask the first question? It looks like it's directed to you because it's all about sort of the strategic conversation. And the question is, how should retail organizations actually prepare and adapt for all the change and the technologies out there?
Yeah, I think it's quite a short answer. I think from my perspective, it's 2018. I'm surprised and frustrated, really, from what I see, that organizations on the high street are still not in a position to be able to deploy new technology quickly. So I think I'm probably swaying to more towards an answer that Andy would give. It's all about your platform and your ability to deploy. Technology, emerging technology, is going to change, and it's going to be conceived and delivered a lot quicker than ever before. So you really need to be in a position to deliver this stuff rapidly at a low cost, and test it in your environment and work out which ones, as everyone's been saying today, which ones work for you, which ones actually deliver that benefit to the customer experience. And we don't know what technology will be around in 5 years' time. So I really just think it's the platform. You need to invest in the right platform now to be able to deploy at a low cost and rapidly. Because otherwise, if organizations are struggling to deliver technology now, I think over the next 4 or 5 years, then they're going to be constantly behind the curve, constantly struggling to deploy new technologies, and just never really being able to bring themselves up to line with customers' demands ultimately.
Brilliant. So the platform is the key there, by the sounds of it. Fantastic. Okay, so another question we have here is one I think is definitely on the technical side of things. So Lawrence, this is going to come to you, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is to do with AI, and I know that AI is a very popular topic at the moment. The question is that AI is currently the most talked about technology when it comes to emerging technology. You mentioned that there is a need to blend sort of the human and AI element. So to create that customer interaction, it could be a combination of both technologies. Could AI learn from the customer interaction and reduce the need for the human to step in? Is that the direction you think it's going to go?
Good question. I think the most important thing to realize is that AI isn't quite what you see in the movies. It's not going to take over the world quite yet. I think human beings are still safe. But it does, as I mentioned, it does have that purpose of being able to deal with repetitive and structured queries and problems and data as well. So if you can make sure that any AI solution you deploy, you understand what its capabilities are and what the outcomes are going to be, then you're good. And make sure that you still have that channel for customer interaction with people. People like to talk to people. People like to hear stories. They like to understand experiences. I don't think it's fairly well shown that AI, although there's been some amazing leaps in its capabilities recently, you see it beating world champions at games such as chess and poker and in Asia Go. It's still working with a limited rule set, and language and human behavior is far too vast and broad and complex to be able to kind of take over that capability at the moment. So yes, that might happen in the future, but I don't think it's going to be for quite a long time. Therefore, it is still important, if you want to have a good customer experience, that you utilize the skills that your agents have got. If you're deploying AI for those structured, repetitive, almost boring queries, please tell me about my account, or how do I get help when I see this error message, or whatever it is, that's fine. And any agents that you did have that were doing that, then you can upskill them, show them how to be a representative for the business and for sales and for more customer interaction. There is an opportunity here to kind of just upskill everybody and upskill the business as a whole.
Fantastic, thanks. We've got one more question that I think definitely this works quite well, because this definitely is more aligned to Andy's perspective. And the third question is a point that you talked about is to do here with integrations and the almost the scariness sometimes behind that, and really that is that required. So the question asked is that it seems to be about blending systems and technologies, but for large organizations that is a scary thing and a big undertaking. But do you think that these larger organizations with sometimes technology stacks, do you think that they're doing enough to make sure that they're not left behind in the future?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it'd be a bit harsh for me just to say no, but yeah, it is an interesting, and it's something I touched on when I was speaking a few minutes ago, and it comes down to it's not an easy one to address, is it? Because when we look at some of the systems that are behind our channels and those legacy systems that are behind those channels, they are ultimately quite often legacy systems, and yeah, we use some of those phrases such as addressing the technical debt. Then it is an expensive thing to do. So you can understand why some organizations are a little bit behind the curve when we're trying to get to a point where customers have that seamless journey, whether it be going into a physical store, using a digital channel online, or calling up for a call center. Like, it's not easy to get to a point where organizations can seamlessly make that happen with an underpinned CRM system, let's say, that backs it up. And the one thing that we have seen, and we do continue to see a lot in some of the companies and deliveries that we work with, is this phrase and implementation of a single view of customer. And that's what you need to get to, really, is try and build yourself an implementation and a delivery platform that allows you to have that single view of your customer, so that then you can not only make the best experience for your customer in terms of when they're going online, is that seamless compared to when they're going in store, so that both your in-store staff and your online platform knows everything about that customer, and that customer has the same journey for both. But also, it's actually for your own organization's benefit to make sure that you get to that point, because you want to try and make the most out of each of your different channels. So you might, for example, want your customer to go online, But whilst they're online, you might want to drive them to your store. So you need the seamlessness of those channels to work both for your customer and for you as an organization, because that helps you ultimately get the most out of all of your assets as an organization, which then goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the return on investment of some of these technologies. And that is, purely from a customer and from an organization perspective, are we doing enough, and are we getting the most out of our resources and our assets?
Brilliant, fantastic, thanks, Andy. I think that brings us to a nice place now where it seems like these are really great questions, and I think there's probably a lot more questions out there. So this is a good time to say that this won't be the first and only webinar that we do on this topic. We will be deep diving in the future with more webinars into similar questions and similar topics that we feel would be valuable to our clients and to you guys as an audience. So I want to first of all thank you very much for staying on this webinar and listening to our content. We definitely welcome a further conversation. So if you do want to speak to us more on a one-to-one basis to perhaps discuss your individual challenges, needs, or hopefully identify some opportunities, we're happy to do that. To do that, simply just reach out to myself. My email address is there, so greg.copley@acftechnologies.com. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to set that up for sure, where we can, like I say, deep dive into individually what you see as the challenges, and maybe see if we can come up with some ideas together. Aside from that, I just want to, like I say, one more time, thank you all for attending. We've really enjoyed this session in terms of the preparation and actually the delivery of this, and we hope that whether you're listening now live or in the future, maybe on a replay, that you feel this is valuable, and at the same time, like I say, feel free to reach out to us. But thank you again, and we hope you have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. So thank you all.